Hello.
Hey.
Hey, Lorcan.
Hey, James, how's it going?
Everybody in the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from while we just wait for a few other people to join. We will get started in 1 minute. Okay, let's get going because I think we've got a bit to get through. So welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to look at how to get started with Conduktor. Should be useful if you are new to Conduktor, even if you already know about Conduktor and maybe you want to learn a bit more about some of the features of some of our different products, then we're going to give a bit of a grand tour today. Couple of housekeeping rules. So if you're new to the Livestorm platform, if this is the first webinar you've been to, feel free to ask us questions. We will be reactive, chuck your questions in, and we can either answer them as we go through or we'll come back to anything at the end. So quick introductions before we get into it. I'm James. I'm Director of Product at the Conduktor. Very happy to be joined by one of our customer success engineers today. So Lorcan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Lorcan Cooke is my name, and I've been working with Conduktor for the last 2.5 years as a customer success engineer, helping our customers succeed better products.
Nice. How have things changed over the years, Lorcan?
Everything's gotten a little bit better, James.
Good. Okay. Yeah. All right. So on to today. So as I said, we're going to give a very quick intro into Conduktor if you're not familiar with us. And then we're going to look at the different deployment mechanisms today for deploying our two core artifacts. That's the Conduktor console, our Kafka management platform, Kafka UI, which you may have seen before. And then we will also do a whirlwind tour of Conduktor Gateway. This is our vendor agnostic Apache Kafka Proxy, which you may be new to you. So, Lorcan, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, James. And I suppose good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to everybody, wherever you're coming in from. But first off, you're probably well aware of the move from batch to data streaming. And in that regard, Kafka is the de facto standard. And however, implementing Kafka can be quite challenging. And maybe that's something you've seen already. And one of our colleagues who has been in the ecosystem for a long time says that the S in Kafka stands for simple. So there's no S in Kafka, and obviously that it's not that simple. But we typically see the customers that we, I suppose, deal with and people that we chat to in the industry fall into one of 5 stages in their data in motion or Kafka journey. Where stage 1 would be early interest, understanding if Kafka is right for them, maybe if they have the right project or not, and if they need that kind of complexity. And then the second stage, identifying a project, they understand that yes, Kafka can be used here in a use case, getting to grips with some of the terminology in Kafka, producers, consumers, topics, distributed systems overall. And then move into stage 3, where Kafka will be in production in at least one project. Once it's in production, then you'll need to ensure that you have monitoring in place, that you trust your monitoring, that kind of things. And then to stage 4, where Kafka is in production in multiple projects. And then you'll need to ensure that you have your end-to-end tests and integrate them with your CI/CD flow. And then finally, stage 5, where you have Kafka as part of your central nervous system in the company, where you're fairly advanced and you're starting to look at things like GitOps for Kafka and ensuring that you have right governance across projects and you can understand who's done what and that they're doing the right things as well. So I suppose why do we bring this up? Well, really because it doesn't matter what stage you're at in your Kafka journey, Conduktor products and solutions can help you, and we're going to show you how we can do that. I suppose it's good to know that if you were looking at Conduktor solutions, that we are complete and agnostic. So what do we mean here? Well, we cover the entire Kafka ecosystem, not just the producers and consumers, but Kafka Connect, KSQL, Schema Registry. Doesn't matter what you're using, we can help you. And then also the same on the provider side. So whether you're using a managed provider or whether you're using an open source Kafka, we can help you. And then this slide, so we'll talk later about in terms of deployments. There's 2 technical artifacts. One is Conduktor console, And that would be the UI in front of your Kafka, which helps you understand your different Kafka resources and control access for your users. And then there is Conduktor Gateway, which is another technical artifact, which would be a proxy in between your Kafka clients and Kafka itself. And that provides further functionality for your applications. And then James, I know, is going to speak a bit more about it, but things like having encryption end-to-end or having virtual clusters to optimize your cluster setup. But just to make you aware that there's two technical artifacts. And then we spoke about two technical artifacts, and then commercially they're split to 4 different solutions. So across those solutions are Conduktor Console, Governance, Data Security, and Optimize. And we're not going to, I suppose, go line by line, but you can see what's in each of those solutions there.
And I guess worth pointing out, Lorcan, that to get the full benefits of any of those solutions, you would warrant deploying both the console and the gateway that we're gonna walk through today.
Yeah, absolutely. And also good to know you wouldn't be the first person to use Conduktor. So since 2020, we have more than 100,000 users across 15,000 global tech teams across basically every industry. So we're not going to pick on anyone here, but you can see a lot of well-known names. And also, if you're in the system integrator space, we work with a lot of your colleagues as well. So, go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, moving on. So we're going to walk through how you deploy both the console and the gateway. And then after each introduction to how you deploy it, we're going to do a quick demo, a quick tour of some of the features and functionality you can expect to find in them as well. So we'll start with the console. So Lorcan, maybe you give us a quick recap of what the console is and what it does.
Yep. So console will give you the ability to explore, view and manage your Kafka resources like your topics, your schemas, etc. Also troubleshoot and have an observability layer. So be able to see live consumers, messages come in as they happen, maybe produce to carry out some ad hoc tests, and then be able to monitor your applications and infrastructure. And then also give you access control to an enterprise level. So granularly for your users down to Kafka resources, and then also for them signing in through a single sign-on, either LDAP or OIDC. That's the functionality you can get in console, which we'll show in a second.
Cool.
So in terms of deployment, what's involved? So there's 2 Docker images, and I suppose there's really 2 hard requirements. So one is the console image, and then a Postgres database to store information related to that, which would be things like your users, any sort of access control, your Kafka clusters, that kind of stuff. If you do want to make use of Conduktor monitoring, you'll have to deploy that as a separate Docker image as well. And then what happens is Conduktor console speaks to your Kafka, takes that information, and then Conduktor monitoring then scrapes metrics from Conduktor console and shows you that information in its own, I suppose, UI section. And then for monitoring, you'll also need to deploy a S3-like storage to store information for more than 2 to 3 days. The final one there for your users, there is the ability to use SSO, so either OIDC or LDAP based.
So meaning supporting all identity providers?
Yeah, as long as you're using either OIDC or LDAP.
Awesome. And the deployment options?
So you have 3 main options, either going with something like Docker Compose, or if you're using Kubernetes, we have a Helm chart that you can utilize. Or if you prefer to use some of the kind of managed container services, then that is also an option. We have a CloudFormation template to use ECS on AWS. But if you prefer to use something like, I think it's called ACI on Azure, I'm not actually sure of the Google equivalent, but whatever way you run containers, you can run Conduktor console.
Awesome. And Terraform templates coming soon as well, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely a hot topic. I suppose maybe getting into a bit more on the technical side on the console deployment, if we're looking at Docker Compose, you can see here there's 2 containers running, the console one on the left, which is taking your Kafka information and then has the Postgres store backing it up. But then you've also got the Conduktor monitoring Docker image. So there's a metrics endpoint, which monitoring is scraping metrics from, and then it's storing that information on its own, I suppose, UI for you. And then you have your S3-like store where you're storing the monitoring information. And then the other thing I was going to say, if you do set up alerts, then there is specific alert manager there as well. The final thing in the most recent version of Conduktor console, in 1.21, we have given you the ability to export the metrics on Conduktor. So maybe you're using something like Prometheus and Grafana yourself. We have those endpoints available for you, and you can basically export that to your own Prometheus endpoint.
And I think if you're just getting started and you're thinking this looks a bit scary, then obviously within the docs.conductor.io, you can find the Docker example, complete Docker compose that's going to spin up all of these services and do all the plumbing for you. So if you are just looking to prove out the value of Conduktor, understand if console's valuable for you, then I'd recommend that as being a good place to start. Maybe a quick point on how you configure console as well, Lorcan.
Yeah, so you can either use environmental variables or a YAML configuration file, so whichever way you want to go about that.
Awesome. Moving on then.
So we also mentioned that we have a Helm chart, and if you're, I suppose, prefer to use Kubernetes, and by default that will start 2 pods, so one console pod and one monitoring pod. If you don't want to use Conduktor monitoring, you can, I suppose, turn it off. By default, it does start. It also provides secrets out of the box, and then supports some of the Kubernetes specific stuff like affinity, toleration, and custom service accounts.
Thank you. I will chuck the link in there to the chat as well, to the public charts repository.
There's
I also saw we got a question from Rob, which while we're at it, I think we might as well address. So Rob's asking, is console still surfacing the key metrics? So Cortex is required only once needing the detailed monitoring with Prometheus.
Key metrics. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is, Rob. We can talk to you afterwards to confirm.
Yeah, I think the main thing here is you get the core metrics associated with like resources, right? Without Cortex. So if you just want to look into your topics, look at the metadata associated with topics in the lists, the consumer groups list, the subjects, then there's no dependency on the Cortex image. However, if you do want to look at any of the metrics that are surfaced in the application monitoring and the cluster monitoring screens, then you do need to deploy the Conduktor console Cortex image as a dependency. So, on to a quick demo.
Cool. Let me share my screen and let me know that you can see it. How's that looking there? Is it looking okay?
Looks good to me.
Cool. So we've talked about deploying console and maybe the benefits of it. So let's say we've deployed console. What can you do inside it? So I've signed in here. What I'm going to show first is once you've signed in, you can set up your Kafka clusters. So you don't have to do it through the UI. You could do this either in the YAML config or maybe using our public APIs. But just, I suppose, for illustrative purposes, show you setting up a Kafka cluster. If I go in here, actually, I can go back one to this guy. So pretty straightforward. You'd add the name of your cluster and your Bootstrap servers, your authentication method, and then you can test connection. And then you do the same for the extended APIs, schema registry, connect, KSQL. And if you have a specific provider, you can connect and enable an integration via API here. And then just if you want to turn off Conduktor monitoring, you can do that through that section there. So we've access to our Kafka clusters. Then the next part, assigning our users and ensuring they have the right access. So here you can see I've got 3 groups. The first is the admin group. We have an operations group and a project, or let's say developer team. So the admin team have access to everything. The operations team, if I go in here, there's only 1 user and they have an external group set up. So what's that? That would be if we're using a single sign-on, we can link or map the groups from our single sign-on across. And then that ensures that the people in our single sign-on, I suppose, as soon as they sign into Conduktor, they're in the right group and have the right access. You can see here the operations team have access to everything in terms of services, and in terms of resource access, I'll actually show the other team, but here would be where we give access to Kafka specific resources. If I go back to the other one, so we go here, whoops, groups, and then in here. So if we go into resource access, we can see we can grant access fairly specifically to on the Kafka resource level. So your topics, your consumer groups, schema registry, connect, the clusters overall, so for your ACLs, and if you were using KSQLDB, and you can get fairly specific here, but it gives you an idea of what you can control for your users. That was really all I wanted to show in this section.
Did you mention about the external group synchronization with the SSO provider?
I think I showed it on the operations one.
Got it. Okay, very good.
So if I go back to the main section, so we've used or signed in to our Kafka cluster, connected to it, given our users access. So what can our users do? Well, if I go to the topics tab, this is the wrong cluster actually. If I go to this one, we can see all of our topics that are on our cluster. And this is actually a smart table as well. So we can filter, say, alphabetically, or if we want to see the topics that have the largest number of messages on them, we can do that here. And what I'm going to do is go into this guy here. So by default, it's going to show me the most recent messages, and I can then filter fairly specifically. But if I turn this off just for a second, so I'm going to go into a message, and then I can see I have a few different views. So I either have the JSON view or I have a table view, which shows me the messages kind of as the data types and values, and I can just understand what's going on.
You might need to turn JQ off if you want to see the table view.
I have JQ on? Oh my God, I did. Yeah. So yeah, there's the table view, and I can just understand maybe a little bit more easily what's going on inside the message.
And you can add a filter from within that view as well. So if you want to look at the flattened version of the JSON object and bring a filter in that way, it's like highly adaptable.
So if I wanted to filter, like you said, for something like this particular ID, I can do that directly there. And I'm going to go with latest hour and latest offset. It take a second actually. But there's a lot of different ways I can add filters. That one might take a second. I'm going to turn it off there for a second. And the other thing that can be quite helpful is we have a live consumer. So I can actually see messages come in exactly as they come into the topic itself. So I can see what's going on live if you want to check something. The other thing is I can show between two different dates. So let's say if I want to see between Sunday and today, or instead of dates, if I want to look at a certain offset or a consumer group, I can do that. The other thing I wanted to show was actually reprocessing a message. So if I stop this guy, and then I'm going to turn that back here and go into one of these guys. So why would I want to do this? Well, maybe I have messages coming into the topic. I have a schema on the topic itself, and I'll have set up either a reject topic or a dead letter queue. And what will happen is the messages that don't meet the schema will go to that reject topic or dead letter queue. And what I can do is, if we're imagining that this is a message that's incorrect, I can click on reprocess message. It'll give me the option to send it to the right topic, which is here. And then I can edit and publish it or change it and publish it to that topic. So if I go along here and do something very straightforward, I can make a change to the message itself and then produce it back to the topic. So I've made my changes and produced it to the right topic. The other interesting things I can do, I can keep track of my schemas and maybe just check their compatibility, make sure that they're correct. If I make any changes to them, I can ensure that there is the right compatibility. So check compatibility, that's all good. On the consumer group side, I can understand the state of all my consumer groups. And something which I can also do is see the lag. And if I go into one of these guys, if I stop the application, what I can do is actually reset the offset. So why would I want to do that? Well, maybe I have messages coming in that I know will be of the wrong value, so I want to skip over them. Or maybe there's messages that weren't processed, so I want to move it back and ensure that they are processed. The other thing I wanted to show was Kafka Connect. So I can understand my Kafka Connect instances, their current state. And if I go into these guys, I can either restart on a connect level or on a task level, which can be quite helpful if they do run into errors. The last thing I want to show on this screen was to
have the auto restart functionality as well, right? So in case of a network blip or something that's prone to bringing down a connector, then obviously you can toggle the auto restart on. And what this will do is, we'll periodically attempt to restart the connector in the case that it does go down. So trying to mitigate any loss of data for you.
And also, if you do have the auto restart on, then if there is issues or when it restarts, that will go to our audit log, so you can keep track of it, which is quite helpful. I was going to show the service account. So if you're using a managed provider, you can connect your service accounts and ensure you have the right access here across your applications. The other thing I was going to show was, if we go back to the operations part, everything I've done has been logged in the audit log. So here I can see what this user, so I've signed in as admin, but I can see I've clicked auto restart, I've produced, I've browsed topics, and that's also searchable as well via either users or what they've done. So it can be, so it's quite helpful for auditing purposes. And the very last thing, so maybe you're using something like GDPR, or you need to mask some data for some of your users, but not all of them. So we have a data policies option here. So what I've done is I've added a policy for a specific field. And what I'm going to show is how that looks on the actual topic side. So if I go back and go into this guy, I think it is. And if I go into a topic, it should be there. And you can see we've masked the server name. So, I mean, give you an idea what it looks like if you were to mask down to field level. But that is really it. I don't know if you think I missed anything there, James.
No, I think on the service accounts point and the integrations with the provider APIs, so Confluent and Avon, you touched upon it earlier, but obviously the added benefit there is obviously you have a slightly deeper integration with the cloud providers. So if you want to manage, for example, your Confluent Cloud API keys all within console as well, then that is something that you would be able to do if you added that integration as well. There's one question from Rob Lorcan. So Rob's curious on whether you can lock down the ability to replay messages. So while you're in the consume view there, obviously you're showcasing kind of consumption of a lot of messages. Maybe that's not something you want available.
To reprocess, is it?
No, just the ability to like replay or consume messages. As I assume that's where that's coming from, Rob. But feel free to clarify. I think the answer is today. I think obviously you can restrict access to specific resources through the RBAC model, the granular RBAC model. But if you did have access to the resources, then there's no way to lock down the consumer today. But yeah.
You can lock the consume down to a specific resource, but then if the person has access to the resource and can consume, then you can't. Yeah. But you can lock the consume though.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm aware of time, but thank you, Lorcan. That was great. Are you seeing my screen again?
Yes.
Okay. So moving on to Gateway in the last bit of time that we have. So quick recap on what is Gateway if it's new to you. So the Gateway is a vendor-agnostic Apache Kafka proxy. As you can see from the diagram, this is something that sits between your client applications and your existing Kafka cluster. So it's complementary to what you have. You simply stick it there. Your clients will have to point to a new Bootstrap server, but it is fully Apache Kafka protocol compliant. That means when you client application communicates with the gateway, it communicates like it would with any other Kafka cluster. Therefore, it can be integrated fairly seamlessly into your existing environment. But why would you do that in the first place? Well, by having that component in there, we have the ability to add what we refer to as interceptors, akin to kind of, let's say, a plugin, whereby within that piece of middleware, we're able to incorporate new functionality, maybe something that isn't native to Kafka. So for example, let's say you are a bank or you have a need to encrypt sensitive data that's going through Kafka. You could use our encryption interceptor to enforce end-to-end encryption, either at a field level or at a full payload level. Equally, it can be used for safeguarding. So let's say that you want to prevent bad practices from your clients. You could use that to kind of enforce configurations and make sure that those apply before anything reaches your Kafka cluster. So you can deploy Gateway much similar to console via Docker or via Helm. So from the Helm charts repository I already pasted earlier in the chat. And if you are curious to try any of the specific demos, there is a really great repository on our doc site at /gateway/demos, and that will take you through tailored demos for some of those specific use cases that relate to those interceptors. But what I thought I'd do today is show something new that was from our last gateway release. I think it was 2.6.0, and this is data quality. And I'll also have an extension if we have time and show how the encryption works as well. So I will just come out of my slide deck. And what you'll see is I also, much like Lorcan, have a console deployment. The advantage of having a control plane for Conduktor means we can actually steer our gateway through it as well. So you can see here that I'm connected to 2 Kafka clusters. I'm connected to the gateway, and I'm connected to a local backing Kafka. So ultimately, I've got this gateway sitting between my client apps and the local Kafka. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the new data quality functionality. So to do that, first thing I'm going to do is create a topic, which is going to be called Adult Customers Avro. And once that topic is created, I am going to add a new schema. But this schema will not look like a completely normal schema, and I will show you why in a second. So our topic's been created, and now I'm going to create a new schema. For the topic name, I'm going to use whatever I called it just now, Adult Customers Avro. And you can see here, I'm just going to paste in an example. Now, what you'll see is I've got some additional metadata in my schema. So as well as the name and the type that you would expect to see in an Avro schema, I've also got this additional piece of metadata, the format email. And what this is going to do is it's going to run a validation check on this field to check that it conforms to an expected email format. And in the same vein, I've got this check on an integer. So for my adult customers records, I expect the minimum age to be 18. So I'm just going to register the schema, and out of the box, there wouldn't be a way to enforce anything on that additional metadata. So what we need to do now is we need to deploy a gateway interceptor, and we can do this from within the console using it as our control plane. So what I can do here is I can search for my interceptor, which is schema validation. And I'm just going to grab a config here, which, as you can see, much like Kafka Connect config, if you're familiar with creating connectors, I can paste in my schema here, and you can see here during my configuration that I'm targeting my adult customers Avro topic. I'm saying that I want to run a check that the schema ID is required, and also I want to put validate schema to true. And what this is going to do is it's going to check that against those metadata rules that all of the fields that I send in my message essentially apply. So I'm going to deploy that. And that has been created. So you can see here, my gateway interceptor is now registered. And what I can do is I can use the console just like any other Kafka client. So let's assume that I'm running Kafka client or Kafka producer, but I'm going to do it in console because I think it's a bit more engaging and it's a little bit easier for me today. So what I can do is I can come into my topic and I can use the producer functionality in console to basically make a test to see if my data quality rules are adhered to. So I'm going to chuck a message in here, and you can see that Fred at Conduktor, here's our record for our adult customers, and he is 16. So based on that data quality rule that assumes that everybody is over 18, we would expect this to fail when we try to produce the record. And there we go. So we see an error saying the request parameters do not satisfy the configured policy. Equally, if we made that 20 and we changed the email to a non-standard looking email as per our other data quality check, then we should see the same issue. Excellent. So our safeguarding interceptor is working as correct. And then, of course, if you were to be a legitimate Kafka producer sending legitimate information in, then of course, this message is going to be passed through into Kafka. And if I just quickly skip to the backing Kafka cluster as well, here you can see, so here we go, here is our underlying message. And of course, prior to that, we were on the gateway interceptor. Now, where that's perhaps more interesting is if we look at the encryption example. So let me go ahead and create a new topic for customer orders. And I am going to now set a encryption policy inside the Conduktor console as well. And my encryption policy is going to check for a specific field, and if it encounters it, so on my customers orders topic, I'm looking for the field email. For the sake of this demo, we're just going to use the in-memory KMS, but of course, we do integrate with Vault, AWS KMS, and all of the major KMS providers. So I'm going to deploy this interceptor, and what we're going to do here is we're going to encrypt the field email if such a message was produced into the customer orders topic, and I'm just using plain JSON for this. If you were curious if this works with schema registry, plain JSON. And I'm going to go into my customer orders topic. And again, I'm going to use the Kafka producer here. And I'm going to produce a message with the email field in it. And once that's done, just take a moment, we'll go back to our consumer. And you can see that our email field is encrypted. And equally, in the underlying Kafka cluster, the data is indeed encrypted at rest. Now, where this gets a little bit more interesting is if I now go back to the interceptors view and I deploy a decryption interceptor. And this is where things might start to click. So I'm going to add another rule here, which basically is a decrypt on consume on my gateway cluster that I'm currently connected to. So I'm going to deploy this. And what that's going to mean, and if you imagine I'm a consumer, and maybe I'm a consumer that has a legitimate reason to see the sensitive or the PII data. Therefore, what we could do is we could employ the decryption interceptor. So then when I read the data, when I'm connected to the gateway cluster, I can actually see the data in the clear. So just giving that flexibility. But ultimately, on that backend Kafka cluster, that email is always encrypted. So really, really powerful. Obviously, this is just a couple of use cases for the gateway overall. Lots of different use cases that I'd encourage you to check out the marketplace, or if it has sparked any interest, and of course, I'd encourage you to reach out after this demo. But one key takeaway from all of that is, the magic there was enabled via the gateway. This is happening on the data plane. This is not just happening as a result of console. The reason that's important is, it could have been easy to see us there today because we were using the console and think those things were happening as a result of using the console. But no, if I was using a Kafka client, those rules would still be enforced on the data plane. And that's what's so powerful about the Kafka proxy.
And James, I've linked the demos in the chat just for people's information if they want to check them out. But I think we also did a couple of webinars specifically on encryption, if people maybe want to check them out too.
Yeah, we did. There is a Kafka confidential data encryption simplified. It goes into full payload encryption, field level payload, field level encryption, crypto shredding, and some more advanced things like that. So definitely check that out if it's of interest. I'm conscious we are nearly there at the time, so thank you everyone who joined. If any of that sparked any interest today, then 3 CTAs. So if you want to engage us to book a tailored demo, book a consultation, then I'd encourage you to head over to Conduktor.io/contact/demo. You can get started with the console for free today. So if you are curious about getting started with console, then head over to Conduktor.io, get started, and there's a one-liner command that will spin up the console on your machine. You'll get connected within about 5 minutes. So really, really simple to set up. And equally, if you want to dig into all of the different things that are enabled by the gateway, then do visit the Conduktor Gateway demos at /gateway/demos as well. I will pause. I don't know if there's any chance for Q&A, if we've got any questions in the chat.
There was one that I was just going to say, somebody asked if we're going to be at the Kafka Summit.
Yes, absolutely. I personally will be there on Tuesday and Wednesday next week with some of the Conduktor team. So if you are going to be there as well, then please do reach out and we can obviously catch up, and that would be excellent. So yeah. Brilliant. Any questions from you, Lorcan?
I'm trying to think. I know it comes up a lot, maybe just specifically on hey, what kind of SSO providers does Conduktor let you use?
Mm-hmm. So we support LDAP and OIDC, so that tends to tick a box, I would say, on most modern IDPs. Keycloak, Okta, Azure, Active Directory. I think they've rebranded it, but I think we generally have full coverage here. And on the AWS side, I guess MSK, like IAM authentication, that seems to be something that comes up quite often.
Yeah, and it's something that we support. So if you're using MSK and I suppose authenticate via IAM, that's something that we fully support. And also if you're using their version of Schema Registry, which is called the Glue Schema Registry, I believe.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have no other questions. So thank you everyone for joining. Like I said, please do get in touch if anything sparked interest today, or go and experiment yourself. Thank you.
See everybody. See you later.